Okay, this is the lesson part 1.4 on the How to Do Algebra series on factorising. Now we're going to learn how to factorise things like, or expressions like 3x plus 6. Okay, now that's the kind of thing you're going to need to be able to do on both the higher and the foundation paper. So you need to be able to do this. Now you won't really see why you need to do this until you get on to some more advanced mathematics. We factorise to help us solve equations, we factorise to help us simplify algebraic fractions or more complicated expressions. So if we're not going to go on to do the more advanced mathematics, it's just a skill you're going to have to master at this stage of your education. Now let's unpick this a little bit, because I don't want to go just jump straight into it. I want to make sure that we can have the skills that we need in order to be able to factorise. So the first thing I want you to do is to write down the factors, please, of the number 6. And if you can put them into pairs, so they're the numbers that multiply together to make the 6, that'd be fantastic. So pause your video and see if you can factorise the number 6. Okay, well, the factor pairs of the number 6 are 1 times by 6 and 2 times by 3. Now if you're struggling to find the factor pairs, you're going to struggle with factorising expressions, because you're looking for pairs of factors, or factors, the common factors, when you're factorising later. So if you're struggling with this, then you need to go away and spend some time practicing factorising before you come and start this video. Here's another one. See if you can factorise 12. Okay, well, we've got 1 times by 12, 2 times by 6, 3 times by 4, but we've also got 2 times by 2 times by 3. Okay, now the last one is a special form, that's called the prime factor forms, because now you notice that all the numbers in this are prime numbers. So these are the different ways that we can write the factors of 12. Now look at both lists, and I'd like you to underline common factors. So the common factors are 1, 2, 3 and 6. So the special number in that list is number 6, because that is the highest common factor. So when we're coming on to factorise later, it's important that you'll be able to find the highest common factor of 2 numbers or 3 numbers or 3 terms, as depending on how difficult the question is. So I want to give you a pair of factors underneath, or pair of numbers underneath, sorry, and I want you to find the highest common factor of these 2 numbers. Pause your video. Right. Okay, well, we've got 1 times by 21 and 3 times by 7. We've got 1 times by 15. We've got 3 times by 5. So the highest common factor in this case is the number 3. So if you found the highest common factor is 3 in that case, then you've got the first tool that you need to be able to factorise. Now before we go on to look at some simple cases just with numbers, or factorising 2 terms, let's just make sure you can factorise or find the highest common factor of those 2. Because if you can't find the highest common factor of these 2 numbers, then you're going to struggle to find the highest to factorise later on. So pause your video and see if you can find the highest common factor. Okay, well, the highest common factor in this case is 6x, because we've got 1 times by 6 times by x, 1 times by 2 times by 3 times by x. We've got 1 times by 6 times by x squared. We've got 1 times by 6 times by x times by x. And we've got 1 times by 2 times by 3 times by x times by x. So the highest common factor here, and you can find it a couple of ways, but the highest common factor is the number 1 times by 6 times by x, and 1 times by 6 times by x. You can see it in both lists. Now 1 times by 6 times by x is 6x. So if you just wrote 6x straight down, fantastic. Okay? So it's a little bit harder to find the highest common factor of numbers which have got unknowns in them. But it's possible. Now there's another way of doing it. You can say, well, what's the highest common factor of the numbers? So the highest common factor of the numbers is 6. And then you look at the unknowns and you think, well, what is the highest common factor of the unknowns? Well, there's an x here and there's an x, lots of x here. So they both have an x in common. So the highest common factor is 6x. So there's a number of different ways you can find the highest common factor, but it's up to you to try and find the way, because unless you can find the highest common factor, you're not going to be able to factorise expressions that have more than one term. So because that's important, I'm going to give you a couple more to do here. Now that's a really hard one, so if you're doing a foundation paper and you struggle with this one, don't give up, because best shot, see if you can find a factor at least of these. If you're doing the higher paper, you should be able to find the highest common factor of these two. Okay, well, the highest common factor of 21 and 15 is 3. And then this has got an multiplied by a on the here, and this has got a multiplied by a here. So there's a common factor of a, and b times by b here, and b here, so it's got a common factor of b. So the highest common factor in this case is 3ab. Now if you manage to get the 3, that's a good start, or an a, that's fantastic, or a b. If you've got 3ab, then you've got everything you need to be able to factorise the hardest ones, because that's the highest common factor. You've got to try and find the highest common factor each time. If you wanted to write it out in full, you could have written that as 3 times by 7 times by a times by b times by b. And this one is 3 times by 5 times by a times by a times by b. And then if you underline the common bits, you've got a 3, an a, and a b, a 3, an a, and a b. So the highest common factor in this case is 3ab. So that's another way of doing it, if you're finding it difficult to find those highest common factors. Okay, so that's finding the highest common factors. What we're going to go on to look at now is how we now look at factorising two terms, because up until now we factorised a single term, factorised another single term, but then looked for the highest common factor between them. But at the moment these two weren't linked, other than the fact we were trying to find a common or highest common factor. Okay, so let's start by trying to factorise 10 plus 20. Now when we factorise things above, when it was a single term, we turn it into two numbers multiplied together. Well, we're going to do the same in this case. Now if you're not comfortable with the idea of brackets being multiplication, or using brackets multiplication, look at one of my earlier videos. But basically, this is another way of saying a number multiplied by a number. So we've got to work out two numbers that can go either side here. Now, in order to find a number that goes in here, we've got to find the highest common factor between 10 and 20. So pause your video and work out what the highest common factor is. Okay, well the highest common factor of 10 and 20 is 10. So we can write 10 here. So it's going to be 10 lots of something is the same as 10 plus 20. Now, the 10 times by 1 gives us 10, and 10 times by positive 2 gives us positive 20. So what we've done here is we found two numbers, each one is inside the bracket. We've got 10 in this side and 1 plus 2 in this side, which when you multiply gives us the same answer as 10 plus 20. And if you look at that, it makes sense, because 1 plus 2 is 3, 10 3s are 30, and 10 plus 20 is 30. Okay, so we put the highest common factor outside the brackets, or inside this first bracket. We can do the same if we put 5 there. Now 5 times by 2 makes 10, and 5 times by positive 4 makes positive 20, and you'll see we get the same idea. Okay. 2 plus 4 is 6, 6 5s are 30. Now this is fully factorised because we find the highest common factor, but this is also factorised. Now in your GCSE or in your A-level, you need to be able to find the highest factor. Now there's only one number in the first bracket when there's two numbers in the second bracket. So we can ignore that first bracket, and actually we could have written that as 10 lots of 1 plus 2. As there's only one number in that first bracket, there's no need to write a bracket. And this is how you will actually see things factorised. But there's nothing stopping us putting the first bracket there. Well, that's what we've done. We've factorised. Just like we factorised the ones above and said, well, what do you multiply together to make that? Well, we're doing the same. What do we multiply together here to make the original term? The original terms in the expression. Here's another example. 16 plus 20. See if you can find the highest common factor of 16 and 20, please. Okay. So the highest common factor of 16 and 20 is 4. So 4 goes outside the bracket. Now we could have put it in a bracket if we wanted. And then what do you add, what do you multiply by 4 to make 16? That's going to be 4. Or 16 divided by 4 is 4. And positive 20 divided by 4 is 5. Or what do you times 4 by to get 20? It's 5. So again we factorised. And if you check, that's 4 9s are 36, and 16 plus 20 is 36. So that's factorising, and you've been able to factorise, and basically seeing it with numbers hopefully will make it a little bit clearer when we come on to factorise later. What I'd like you to do, please, is see if you can factorise that one for me. So pause your video. Okay, well the highest common factor of 21 and 15 is 3, so it's going to be 3 lots of something. 21 divided by 3 is 7, or 3 times by 7 gives me 21. And 3 times by 5 gives me 15, so I get 7 plus 5. 7 plus 5 is 12, and 3 12s are 36, and 21 plus 15 is 36. So we've taken these two terms, we found the highest common factor, and then we've turned it into a product. Just the same way as 15 can be thought of as 3 times by 5. We've now taken this single number, and we split it into two a product where there are factors. Okay, now we're going to extend these ideas to algebra now. We're going to start with a nice basic example, 2x plus 4. Now the common factors, or the highest common factor of 2x plus 4 is the number 2. So I'm going to write it down over to the right hand side there. That's the highest common factor. Highest common factor is 2. So this is going to be 2 lots of another number. Now again, I could have put that in a bracket if I wanted to, but when there's a single term in a bracket, there's no need for the bracket. So what do we times the 2 by to get 2x? That answer is x, because 2x times is 2 lots of x gives 2x. And what do we times the 2 by to give positive 4? The answer is positive 2. So that's been factorised, that's fully factorised. So that's probably the kind of questions that you're used to seeing. So 2x plus 4 can be factorised to 2 lots of x plus 2. Now you can always check you got the right answer by multiplying the brackets out, and there's a video on multiplying brackets if you're not sure how to do that. So you can see that factorising, multiplying brackets or expanding brackets. So you factorise and then you can expand, factorise and expand. You should be able to check those answers. That's a nice straightforward one. Let's do another straightforward one, 3x plus 9. Okay, so I'd like you to see if you can do this one. So try and find the highest common factor first. Okay, you probably know it's 3, so it's the 3 that goes outside the bracket. Now work out what goes inside the bracket. Remember, we're finding two numbers that multiply together to make our original expression. Okay, well we need a x here because 3 lots of x makes 3x, and then to get this positive 9 we need a positive 3 here. 3 times by positive 3 makes 9. So these are the two numbers, 3 and x plus 3, which are the factor pair that are the same as 3x plus 9. Just in the same way as 9 is the same as a factor pair of 3 times by 3. Do that question please, but be careful with the negative number. Okay, the highest common factor again is 3, so that's what goes outside the bracket. Well, that's the number you're multiplying the other number by. And again it's x here, because 3 times by x is 3x, or 3x divided by this 3 gives me x. And then what do we times by 3 to get negative 9? Well, the answer is negative 3. Now, if you're not sure on that, then as I said in previous videos, you must fix your negative numbers, so go away and look at those. So they're straightforward ones. Straightforward factorising. And I'm going to give you a couple underneath. Let's see if it focuses. I'm going to give you a couple of questions underneath for you to try before we look at some more complicated ones. Okay, so try those 4 questions, please. Pause the video now. And here are the answers. Now you may have taken a 2 out here and got 18x minus 8, and you have factorised it if you did, but you didn't fully factorise it. So always look for the highest common factor if you want to do a full factorising and get the full marks. Now here's a little lesson to you. I've made a mistake here. Everyone makes mistakes every now and again, and I've tried to overwrite it there, and there's now some uncertainty whether that's a 4 or a 9. In an exam, don't ever do that. If you made a mistake, be honest and cross it out and write it again. Don't give the examiner any concerns over what that number was. You don't want them to guess whether you got it right or not. Make it very clear. So don't try and overwrite answers, write it nice and clearly. Okay, so that's straightforward factorising, and on a foundation paper that might be all you have to do. But we are going to look at more complicated ones now, so if you do find the next few hard, or the next few examples hard, don't panic. If you can do these, that's brilliant, and it's just something that you're going to develop with a bit of time and with a bit of confidence. Okay, so now we're going to start off by looking at something a little bit more complicated. So 3x squared minus, well, let's make it plus x. So 3x squared plus x. Now you might look at that and think, well, there's no number in common. It hasn't got a number in common here because there's a 1 in front of the x and 3, so we could take a 1 outside, but that's not going to do us any good. So maybe we can't factorise this. But remember that 3x squared could be written as 1 times by 3 times by x, and x can be written as 1 times by x. Now if you underline the things that they have in common, they have the 1, the 3, oops, so they don't have the 3, and the x, so ignore the 3. So what they've got in common is one lot of x, or x. So the highest common factor of 3x squared and x is x. So we found the highest common factor of 3x squared plus x, and it's x. So it's the x that goes outside of the bracket. Now what do we times the 1 by to get the 3? Well, that's 3. What do we times the x by to get x squared? That's x. And what do we times x by to get positive x? Well, that's 1. We need 1x to get x. So that's factorised. It's a little bit more complicated now because we're taking an unknown outside the bracket. And again, you could have put that in a bracket if you wanted to, because it's two numbers multiplied together is the same as those original terms, or that original expression. Let's try another one. 6x squared plus 9x. So 6x squared can be written as 1 times by 2 times by 3 times by x times by x. 9x can be written as 1 times by 3 times by 3 times by x. So, and if you underline the things they've got in common, if I'm trying to be careful this time, the 1 is in common, the 3 is in common, and there's an x in common. So the highest common factor is 1 times by 3 times by x, or 3x. So that's the thing that's going to go in the first bracket or outside of the bracket. 3x. Now we've got to work out what goes inside the bracket. So what do you times by 3 to get 6? Yep, 2. And what do you times by x to get x squared? X. And what do you times by 3 to get 9? 3. And what do you times by x to get x? 1. So you could put times by 1 there, but 3 times by 1 is 3. So there's no need. So that is fully factorised. 3x, lots of 2x plus 3. Now, as you get better at maths, you may not need to, or more confident, so you may not need to put this intermediate step in. Okay, and a lot of students will be doing this bit in their head, working out the highest common factor in their head, but there's nothing wrong with splitting it out like that when you're trying to find the highest common factor. (16ab) squared plus 4a squared b. Right, so over to you. See if you can find the highest common factor first, and then that's what goes in the first bracket or outside of the bracket, and then work out what goes inside the bracket afterwards. Pause the video. Okay, so you might have done it in your head and found the highest common factor, or if not, you could say, well, 16 is 1 times by 4 times by 4 times by a times by b times by b, or you might have spotted it's 1 times by 2 times by 2 times by 2 times by 2 times by a times by b times by b, and 4a squared b is 1 times by 2 times by 2 times by a times by b. Now that is quite complicated, and quite a few of you will think, well, that's more complicated than just doing it in my head. Well, if that's how you can do it, that's fantastic. So let's underline the things that are common. The 1 and a 2 there, look, another 2 there. Now there's no more 2's this side, an a there, there's no more a's this side, a b there. So the highest common factor is going to be 1 times by 2 times by 2 times by a times by b, or 4ab. Now quite a few of you might have gone straight to that and said, yep, it's 4ab, and if you can do that, fantastic. There's nothing wrong with going directly there, and you do not need to show these workings. I know we always say show your workings, but this step here you do not need to do in an exam unless you're struggling to find the highest common factor. So 4ab now can go outside the bracket, or in the first bracket, and then we've got to think to ourselves, well, what do you times 4 by to get 16? It's 4. What do you times a to get a? 1. So we could put times by 1 here, but we won't. And what do you times by b to get b squared? B. And on the other side, what do you times by 4 to get 4? Positive 4, well, it's going to be positive 1. And if there was nothing else going in here, we'd have to write it. But as there's an a times by an a gives an a squared, and a b times by b gives a 1, then we can leave it like that. But if there wasn't an a there, you must put the 1 in. Okay. I'll give you an example of one like that right away so we understand. 3x squared plus 3x. So the highest common factor, I'm just going to put it down straight away, in this case is 3x. Okay, so that's the highest common factor of 3x squared, and 3x is 3x. Now, what do we times the 3 by to get the 3? It's 1. What do we times the x by to get the x squared? It's x. What do we times the 3 by to get the 3? It's 1. And what do we times the x by to get the x? It's 1. Now, I've said you don't put the 1s down, because 1 times by something is just the something. But in this case, there's nothing else we're multiplying by other than 1. So it's very important that you put the 1 in, or the 1 times by 1. Now 1 times by 1 is 1. So be careful of ones like that, or questions like that. So there's some harder examples. Okay, so we're going to finish now with 4 examples of the harder ones, and then we're going to move on the next video to quadratic factorising, which is for the higher students only. Okay, there's your 4 questions. Question 4 is particularly tricky, just for the test of the highest and the most able students watching this video. Okay, so take your time, make sure you fully factorise, and when you're ready, restart the video to find the answers. And here are the answers. Again, you may not have fully factorised, so if you haven't fully got the exact answers the same as I have, then look back and see if there's something you've missed in the highest common factor. You haven't found the highest common factor, basically, if you haven't got 8x, 5x, 3ab and 3xyz outside of the bracket. And you can always check your answers by multiplying the brackets back, so multiplying or expanding the brackets and seeing if you get the original expression. Now, before we move on, I did say we're going to move on, but before we move on, we've only looked at expressions with 2 terms. Let's just very quickly look at an expression with 3 terms. Now, a lot of people look at that question and think, well, it can't be done, or I've never looked at one like this before because I've only ever looked at 2 terms. But it's exactly the same idea. We're just extending our concept now, but looking at expressions with 3 terms. So now we've got to find the highest common factor between these 3 numbers, these 3 different terms. So if we write it out as 1 times by 3 times by x, 1 times by 2 times by x, and x, or 1 times by x times by x times by x, we now have to find the highest common factor for 3 terms, or 3 numbers. So we've got the 1 is in each pile, or each list. We've got, well, there's no 3, but we've got an x there, look. And there's no more x's in this one, so we can't take an x out here, any more x's, so we can't underline anything else. Even though there's an x here and there's an 2 x's here, there's not an x and there's another x here, so it has to be in each list. So now we know the highest common factor of all 3 of these terms is 1 times by x, or just x. So that's going to go outside the bracket. Now x times by 3x squared. Well, what do we times by x to get 3x squared? Well, x times by 3x gives us 3x squared. What do we times by x to give us 2x? That's 2. And what do we times by x to get x cubed? That's x squared. So the answer is x lots of 3x plus 2 plus x squared. And we can extend our ideas to 4 terms, 5 terms, and so on. And then as you get into more advanced mathematics, you have to cope with more terms and looking for the highest common factor of more terms. Okay. So one example for you to do and I'm going to make it quite hard on purpose. So that's the example I want you to do, last example, for 3 terms. So the highest common factor here, now this is quite complicated and you can write it out in full, and you might want to do this later if you can't find it. The highest common factor of 21, 7 and 42 is 7. The highest common factor of x cubed, x squared and x cubed is x squared, and then a squared and a is a. So that's the highest common factor. Now remember, you can write them out as lists underneath and underline the common things, and then find the highest common factor that way. Now, what goes inside the bracket? Well, 7 3's make 21. X squared times by x makes x cubed, and a times by 1 gives a. So I could put a 1 there, but we don't if we've already got something else written down. 7 times by minus 1, so I could write the 1, but I know later on I'm going to write something else, so I'm not going to bother for now. X squared times by 1 gives x squared, and a times by a gives a squared. And then finally, 6 times by 7 gives 42. X squared times by x gives x cubed, and then a times by 1 gives a. So that's a fully factorised form, and hopefully quite a few of you got that one right. If not, you might want to go back and try it again in a couple of days' time when you don't remember the answer. Okay, so hopefully that's useful.